So kids, wages were high, businesses were making big profits, people were spending their money in the stock market, and they were making money. And we talked about how that worked yesterday. And we said during most of 1929, most of it, stock market prices soared to their highest levels ever. However, on October 24th, 1929, it all came crashing down upon the United States. There were more goods that had been produced that were being sold, and Americans who had invested their money in the stock market took tremendous losses. And we said by mid-November of 1929, it was estimated that anybody that invested money in the stock market lost half of their investment. About $30 billion was lost across the United States from people that had invested in the stock market. Now, I'm going to give you some examples of what happens when you have a crash in the stock market and what begins what we know as the Great Depression. First of all, what type of businesses might close their doors because of a crash in the stock market?
Walmart.
Factories. So factories and mines shut down. Why? Because they had produced so much, we already had more supply than we had demand. So factories and mines shut down because they had produced more goods than could be sold. So there's no sense continuing to produce them because nobody was buying them. So factories shut down. Now let's think about how this makes a chain reaction. So if factories shut down, what other thing might shut down?
The producer?
The businesses. Very good. Businesses closed. Okay, because the factories aren't producing anything. They're not giving the businesses anything, but the businesses already have more supply than demand. Their stores are full. Nobody's buying anything. So not only did factories shut down, but businesses closed down. Okay? Now, if businesses close down and factories close down,
people lose jobs.
People lose jobs. And so what else might occur is unemployment. That's exactly right. So another example is by 1930, there were approximately 650,000 workers in this country that were unemployed.
What year was that?
By 1930, approximately 650,000 Americans were employed. So, factories and mines shut down because there's more supply than demand, which forces businesses to shut down because they don't have any customers coming in their doors. When businesses shut down, people get laid off. By 1930, approximately 650,000 Americans were unemployed. What about the people that transport the goods from the factories to the businesses? In this case was what?
Ships.
Railroads. Railroads shut down. There was no products to transport. So factories shut down, businesses shut down, people become unemployed, your railroad shuts down because there's nothing to transport. And when all these four things happen, what's the big business that shuts their doors?
Banks.
Banks. Very good. So banks were closing the doors. So, because of the stockholders across the United States losing $30 billion, factories and mines shut down, businesses shut down, railroads shut down, banks shut down, and nearly 650,000 Americans were unemployed by 1930. Now, it's a big chain reaction, right? So unemployment means fewer customers meant less production meant more unemployment. And by 1932, 12 million Americans were out of work. By 1932, 12 million people out of work.
What was the population at that time?
Well, I don't know. Now, what are the different social classes? Middle class, upper class, lower class, okay? So the Great Depression affected every social class in the United States, and we'll talk about the upper class. This is how the Great Depression affected the upper class. Their money was all lost through investments they had made. They were the people investing in the stock market, were the upper class people, and they lost everything in the stock market. So upper class people were affected by the Great Depression. They saw their fortunes disappear through investments they had made when the stock market crashed. What are your middle class people doing? What did they lose in the Great Depression? Jobs, which meant they lost money. So middle class people lost jobs and lost their money. How about lower class? What did they lose?
Nothing.
They lost their jobs and even had less money because they had less money in the first place. So everybody's broke. The upper class is broke because they lost all their money in investments. The middle class is broke because they've lost their jobs and they probably could survive a little longer than the lower class, but they had no money to begin with, and losing a job even made it worse. So if you're a lower class person, you're probably working paycheck to paycheck. If you're a middle class person, you're probably putting some money in savings each month.
Is this something that made the American dollar lose value?
Absolutely. And if you're an upper class person, you're used to a high lifestyle, and all of a sudden you don't have any money. Now, anybody know what an economist is?
Somebody that studies the economy?
Somebody who studies the economy. And economists in history came up with 5 reasons why we had a Great Depression. 5 reasons why. Now, we talked about some of these. Number one, the number one reason economists, not number one, but the first reason the economists think we had a Great Depression were events following World War I. Events following World War I. And we talked about this a little bit. Okay, what happens right after a war? We have destruction of property, right? And we also have worldwide dislocation of trade, because we were trading with everybody during the war because that's what they needed goods. After the war, the trade dislocated, so to speak. Okay? So, events following World War I. Examples of that are destruction of property during the war, and the second example is worldwide dislocation of trade after the war. Our trading went down after the war. Okay? The second reason why we had a depression was America's high tax policies. Were we taxing our own people? Not if we were doing well. Who were we taxing?
Foreign countries.
Foreign countries. Why would we tax foreign countries? Charge them a hell of a lot of money to bring their goods into our country.
Make money?
Because we wanted to make money in our factories. So what we did is we taxed foreign countries to death so they wouldn't bring any more things into our country. And we were okay with that at the time because we wanted to produce those goods. Well, what happened? We produced more goods than the demand. That's right. So America's high tax policies is the second reason economists believe that we had a Great Depression. Third one was Americans borrowing money. Americans borrowing money. What do they borrow money to do?
Fight the war?
Buy things,
Like what?
like houses?
No, not so much that so much. They actually, because they thought they could make some money in this endeavor, what?
Stocks.
They borrowed money to invest in the stock market. So they're thinking, geez, I'll borrow $5,000 and buy $5,000 worth of shares, and it'll double, and I'll pay the loan back, and I'll make $5,000. That was the mentality among a lot of Americans. Well, not only, when the stock market crashed, not only did those people lose that had their money in the stock market, but how the banks do that lent this money to these people? They gave money back. So Americans borrowed too much money during the decade, and it makes sense. If I thought I could put some money into Under Armour today, and then in a week I would double my money, hell, I'd run to the bank and borrow 10 grand, and I'd give it to those guys, and the next week I'd get 20, I'd give them their money back and be happier than a pig in mud. That was the philosophy, and that worked for a while. But when the stock market crashed, not only those people that invested in the stock market get crushed, but the lending institutions that gave them the money got crushed also. Okay? Okay, the fourth reason why, and it kind of went to what Garrett was starting to say, it was part of the American system. Part of the American system. And what did Garrett just say a minute ago? When I asked what people did with their money.
Houses?
Well, yeah, what they did is they were making a whole lot of money, and it was easy money, and they spent it like crazy. They spent all their money on things. You have a depression can become inevitable if you get a lot of easy money and people just buying everything new. Because when the economy goes down, how does that work for you? I'll give you an example. My son, his first great decision he ever made, you always get on your kids about doing such stupid things, right? It's like your parents got on you. My son was teaching in Fernley, Nevada, and he thought he and his wife were going to buy a house. And the interest rates were down a little bit, and he thought he ought to buy a house, but the housing prices were pretty good. So I said, you might want to be careful there. And he listened. A bunch of his buddies bought houses, 4-bedroom houses for $250,000. And they got them at 6% interest, whatever. All of a sudden, that area became horribly depressed because the Amazon.com factory that was there closed down. They had a big factory. When you buy something from Amazon.com, it came from them. All of a sudden, his buddies have houses they paid $250,000 for that are appraising for $85,000. And so the point was, these people went out and had this money. God, we're making good money teaching in Nevada. Let's go buy us a house. Well, when the market crashed or Amazon moved out, then that house became worth nothing. So what are your choices? Your choices, you'll be okay, as long as you continue to teach in Fernley, Nevada the rest of your life. But if you decide to move on and teach somewhere else or something happens for you and you have to sell your house, how's that going to work for you? Not very well. You're going to owe more on your house than you ever did for it by 3 times. So his friends are still there teaching. He was able to move on and go teach in a middle school in Seattle, which is a lot better situation for him. While his friends are kind of stuck there because they're stuck there married to what? Their mortgage, yeah. Okay, and the 5th reason they give for the depression was the uneven distribution of income across the United States. The uneven distribution of income across the United States. What would I mean by that?
Like, there's like,
too much money at the top and not enough money at the middle and the bottom. Does that make sense? And so farmers had to borrow a lot of money at that time so they could purchase their seed and buy their equipment, buy their farm machinery to survive. And they were producing very well, and they were making good money on that. Wage earners needed more money so they could purchase those items. And the rich people had all the money up here, and when the stock market crashed, it just devastated the whole bunch. So uneven distribution of income across the United States. Now, although this individual person really never had a lot to do with it, and the Pope or the good Lord himself could have been president at the time and the Depression still would have occurred, who got blamed for the Great Depression? Who's known as the president? Who was at the time? Herbert Hoover. Basically took the whole blame for the Depression. Really, it was not his fault. He became president at the wrong time. So how smart was Calvin Coolidge in not running for president again when he could have? He could see that things were getting tough. You know what I mean? And I compared to yesterday the coach that leaves when he knows the cupboard's bare, so to speak. So the one person that America blamed for the Great Depression was Herbert Hoover. Now, in the upcoming election of 1932, the United States is going to need to elect a man that's capable of pulling the United States out of the Great Depression. And this new president would need to open banks, create jobs, get people back into employment situations. He would have to do he'd have to be a miracle worker. Well, just so happened the man that was elected in 1932 was a miracle worker. And he was so popular, he was elected to 4 terms as president, and it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So Roosevelt pulled us out of the Great Depression like you would not believe and got things going again. But soon after his election, a couple elections, what did we end up getting into in 1941?
World War II.
World War II. And World War II lasted throughout Eisenhower's administration and went into Harry Truman's. And General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who then became president, was actually the overall commander of European forces in World War II. So we didn't get out of a world war until Dwight Eisenhower became president in 1952. Okay? Now it got over before that, but we were still trying to figure things out. All right, let's have a little review here so we know what's going to be on the test. Now, would you guys rather have the test Monday or Tuesday?
Tuesday.
Okay, Tuesday will be fine. Monday we'll find something to do. Okay, I would know at least 2 names other than the Roaring 20s that the decade of the 1920s was known as. Okay? I said that the 1920s were a decade of change. I would know at least 2 examples of that. One would be movies, one would be radio, one would be electricity, one would be inventions.
Know how many of those?
2, I'd know 2. I'd know the biggest symbol of change in the decade of the 1920s. What was the biggest symbol of change? The automobile. I would know who Alexander Fleming was. I would know at least 2 jazz composers during the Jazz Age. I'd know at least 2 and what they did. For example, Jelly Roll Morton was a jazz composer. Bessie Smith was a female jazz singer. Louis Armstrong was a jazz singer and a trumpet player. And Duke Ellington was a jazz musician. Yeah, I know 2 of those. I would know which 2 actors or actresses made up the star couple of the movie industry in the 1920s. What was the star couple? John Barrymore and Lillian Gish. I would know your heroes in the 20s. I gave you Gertrude Ederle, Charles Lindbergh, Barney Oldfield, Helen Wills, Jack Dempsey, Babe Ruth, and Red Grange. I would know those heroes. I would know not so much their name, but what they did. In other words, what does that tell you? Might be what type of test? Matching. There you go. Okay. I would know the ratio of wheat prices during World War II in comparison to what they dropped to after World War One.
Can you clarify what the ratio is, what you want?
Between 2 to 1 would be what I'd give. Yeah, 2 to 1 is better. It actually would be 2.26 to 1 if you were really after, but we'll just take 2 to 1. Okay. You could put 2.26 and be correct. Okay, I would know about the Boston police strike, and what I know about that is basically the police went on strike. What they were striking for, higher wages and improved working conditions. You should know the story basically that they struck, all kinds of violence broke out. They realized that their strike was not very popular, and so they said they were going back to work, but what happened when they said they were going back to work?
He got fired.
By who? They all got fired by who? The police commissioner, who was backed up by Massachusetts Governor Calvin Coolidge. Okay, you should know that.
Wait, why did you go on strike for better working conditions and higher wages?
Yeah. I would know which strike, either the coal strike or the steel strike, that ended in arbitration.
Cool.
Okay? I would know who Warren Harding was, who James M. Cox was, who Albert Fall was, who Edwin Denby was.
Can you start over with those names?
Yep.
Thank you.
Warren Harding, James M. Cox. I'm kind of going in order here. Albert Fall and Edwin Denby. I would know who Robert La Follette was. John W. Davis. Herbert H. Hoover. Alfred E. Smith. And I would know the 5 examples of what happened economically after the Great Depression. And what I mean by that, don't get confused, not the reasons for the Depression, but what happened economically. What happened is factories and mines closed their doors, businesses closed their doors, railroads shut down, banks shut down, and about 650,000 Americans were unemployed in 1930, and that number rose to 12 million by 1932. Okay, I think that'll about do it. Any questions at all on that? That test will be worth 90 points, and that will be Tuesday.